The truth burns like a fire to those who resist it. And when I say that, I don't mean in the sense that you are told something that's true, but with which you do not agree, such that it's painful. I mean that the truth activates the energy body, causes it to resonate at a higher vibration. When there's no resistance to the truth, it is palpably perceived as love. But when resisted, it burns like a fire. But in the predominant state, the energy body is not exposed to the truth due to there being an outer layer of insulation in the form of egoic thought structure, a shell. It's like the insulation that surrounds a wire. But when that shell is cracked, there's an exposure to the truth that causes the energy body to activate in terms of its perceivability. It could be likened to how alkali metals react violently when exposed to water. When the energy body is exposed to the truth while at the same time being bound up in the unreality of time, then there is a burning reaction to resistance to what is. So long as there's resistance to reality, there will be a burning. So two people exposed to the same truth, two energy bodies exposed to the same truth, the same moment, can react completely differently depending on what's held in mind. The energy body that's only partially exposed will actively burn when attention is given to regretful or nostalgic thoughts of the past, fearful thoughts of the future, and generally ideas about the way things should be will cause an intense burning discomfort for one whose egoic structure has been torn such that the energy body is partially but not fully exposed. And conversely, the one who is present and having the whole wire stripped of its egoic coating has no identification with one to be in resistance to what is. And in that surrender, the energy body resonates with the truth at the level of love. So these two different experiences can be had while still embodied. It should be noted that these two ways of experiencing the truth are themselves apart from the predominant state of being, as they represent, on the one hand, a partial stage of awakening where there's delusion but the energy body is palpable, and then the other being full liberation. There is no perception of being a thought or form, and in that lack of concern for something appearing in awareness, there is a liberation that is more than just not having a care. There is that, but beyond this is a peace that fills the whole form, radiating from the spiritual heart. Beings who abide in such a state are findable. They have existed through history. You could read about Ramana Maharshi and how he radiated waves of bliss to those who came to visit him. God has been described as both the truth and love. As fleshly beings, we don't believe ourselves to be close to heaven generally, but the experience of either bliss or burning in the presence of the truth can be had while still in the body. But the predominant state is a numbness to this phenomena that allows people to be materialists. A change in the way that reality is perceived will remove the certainty of the mundanity of things. It makes apparent a different set of consequences for thoughts and action. For the materialist, those consequences are counted in terms of emotion and circumstance. For a sociopath, there are not so strong emotional consequences for actions, just the circumstance. But for most people who are mind identified, there are emotional consequences for regretful actions. regardless of whether there are emotional consequences for actions while in the state of doership. The ignorance required for belief in doership is belief in the illusion of separation. And in that illusion of separation, people who are well behaved are well conditioned, or just predisposed by nature to be gentle. But even the most well-adjusted, well-raised, well-conditioned person is capable of being insular. Their kindness is still conditional. It depends on some overlap or familiarity. The world is full of people who are kind to their families, but to strangers they may as well be a seagull, like a bird that'll swoop in and steal your French fries. Now that human beings have the technology to annihilate themselves, there are ways of calculating the number of years that can go by before that happens. Like, there is some kind of calculation behind the doomsday clock. It's probably based on real-world variables being tracked by people. But generally speaking, there's a relationship between the probability of annihilation, technology, and the average level of human consciousness. There are, at any time, a certain number of people in the world who, if given sufficient power, would do something that would bring about our destruction, perhaps not intentionally, but due to their own unconsciousness and inability to foresee consequences. That number or percentage of people varies with the level of human consciousness. The fact that one person can move from being unconscious to conscious implies that others can, and it implies that there can be varying levels of this within a population at any given time. So between the deepest level of unconsciousness and the most liberated being, there are many gradations of consciousness. There are people who do not have it in them to pull the trigger on something that would be disastrous. Take, for example, Stanislav Petrov. I hope I pronounced that right. But he was a Russian in the Soviet era who was manning an early warning system for missile launches. And the system detected some launches that turned out to be false. But he had a choice to either believe it or to disregard standing orders and do nothing. And had he acted, it could have destroyed the world as we know it. Someone who was more deeply ingrained in their programming might have simply followed through with it. So this variable that is the level of consciousness within the population, it's expressed in how many people in the population would lead us to our doom if they were given sufficient power. Given unlimited power, it's certain that almost any one of us could destroy the world simply by tinkering too much with it. But unlimited power isn't the multiplier in this function. Just the level of power that technology would afford a madman or a group of mad people. So the higher the percentage of such people in the population, multiplied by the probability that they will have access to dangerous technology, which is itself a function of how many unconscious people are there in the world to invent it. So we have unconscious inventors and unconscious users. So the average level of consciousness among humanity determines whether the technologies get invented and get used. It's possible to imagine a world in which there is both a high level of consciousness and a high level of technology. But this does bring up the question as to the correlation between consciousness and technological development itself. Consciousness runs inverse to the weight of egoic structure and the strength of identification with it. That egoic structure is the product of information. It is information. The history of the human mind can be charted in terms of the average memory usage, the body of concepts available to fill the mind. The history of the mind is the history of content. And the history of content is one of nonlinear growth, the body of recorded information that humans have produced has grown in a nonlinear fashion. Given that there's so much more to put into minds, it would be logical to assume that minds are holding more concepts all the time, more and more. Humans have always been violent, but they're violent for different reasons in different periods. It doesn't seem believable that human beings were killing each other over ideology in the Stone Age. They were primarily killing each other over resources. And ideology does relate to resources, and it's just ideas on how best to allocate or manage them. But primitive humans fought for a very direct kind of gain, not ideas about resources to which there's a religious kind of loyalty. People who kill over ideology use it as a buffer, an extra layer of transaction to obscure the fact that they really just want to take people's stuff. It's just the seagull with a fancier veneer. It's also much easier to do bad things to people who oppose your ideas. To the extent that you're identified with those thoughts, a person who offends them may as well be offending your body or your family. So human history is characterized by an accumulation of ideas, not a diminishing of them. And the weight of ideas being that which deepens human unconsciousness and also that which advances technology suggests that there is a correlation between the advancement of technology and the level of unconsciousness within humanity. Warfare always seems to accelerate technology, but there will be no dispelling of the fantasy of a world of conscious people in a highly technologically advanced society. There seem to be people who would like to see a cull in the world followed by some picking up where we left off in terms of technology, but with a more conscious, higher quality population. I did not invent the phrase fewer, better people. The advent of such a happening, though, would likely only hail the restart of another accumulation cycle. If the human timeline consists of a monotonic accumulation of mental dross that causes an unconsciousness that expresses itself in a restlessness of people that makes them constantly want to mitigate risks through action and accumulation, which causes them to invent dangerous technologies, then you will have an endpoint preceded by alternating periods of peace, prosperity, and destruction, the magnitude of which would increase in the lead up to the endpoint. So there was agriculture, which allowed us to breed more people, which allowed us to create a cultural base that allowed us to invent more things and then eventually be able to record information. Once we could start accumulating information, it caused technology to grow exponentially, but it also made us more and more unconscious and likely to fight over superficial things, not just raiding to steal women and resources. Although, as I said, all these ideas are just a veneer for that. But taking it as a given that there will be agriculture and sufficient population for a cultural base, then the antidote to the accumulation and endpoint would be in consciousness. If you examine the lives of beings who fall at the extrema of consciousness, the hallmark would be a true lack of need to do anything. Going back to Ramana Maharshi, I do not perceive that he was a charlatan, so I will take it as a given that he was genuine. But if you examine his life, you'll see he didn't have a wanderlust. From the time he showed up at Arunachala, he never left. He stayed there until he left the body. So I would hold him up as an example of the extrema for a conscious, embodied being. So imagine an entire world of such beings. There would be no accumulation between the ears. There would not be the tree of ego growing from the root thought I, which shades the light of truth and hides the love the absence of which motivates so much vain pursuit. These beings would simply have no impetus to create what we call progress. But that is an extrema. Maybe there could be a world where 1 out of every 100 people is a Ramana. A being like that exerts an influence on those around them. What they can teach, really, is an immunity to undue influence, an immunity to not just one particular type of wrong view or incorrect worldview, but rather an immunity to having any idols for which to kill or subjugate others, an immunity to the hunger that's induced by the sheer weight of emotionally laden mental content and identity. It's hard to manipulate people who are not needy in any way. And when they can't be propagandized, there are no inner handles that can be grabbed through the use of mass media for the purpose of manipulation. So there is real world value in spirituality.